Determination and Directed, the two middle children of stat priorities, never quite good enough to be the main priority, but never so bad as to not be worth taking. Determination had an interesting journey of being the third choice to becoming the shared second choice due to buffs. And Directed, despite being supposedly the DPS stat, tends to be more highly valued by tanks and healers than actual DPS players due to abundance. Both stats are sort of considered better than even crit in a vacuum, yet critical hit is prioritized over them in reality. But why exactly is that? Well, it boils down to a few reasons, so let's talk about that. First, Determination increases all your damage done, and specifically your healing done by spells, by 0.1% for every 13.5714 points of Determination. This means that Determination directly increases all your damage output consistently without fail. However, it only increases the healing output of a limited list of actions, and notably, as only healing spells are affected, a lot of jobs that might look favorably upon the healing bonus cannot or will not make use of it anyway. Next, by default, all jobs have a 0% chance to perform a Directed, which is an attack that deals 25% more damage. For every 3.45 points of direct hit, this chance is increased by 0.1%. Naturally, an attack can both critical hit and direct hit simultaneously, leading to much greater damage. On average, you'd need 0.4% direct hit to gain plus 0.1% average damage, which means that you'd need 13.82 direct hit to get 0.1% more damage done, on average. What this means is that in a vacuum, Determination is around 1.8% better than direct hit. An additional thing to keep in mind is that there are no effects in the game that directly interact with or grant Determination, but there are several buffs that grant bonus direct hit chance. There are also attacks that are guaranteed to direct hit, however, these attacks derive a damage bonus from direct hit, so this is simply a detail to keep in mind. Finally, only attacks can be a direct hit, and supportive actions cannot. However, as Determination only affects healing spells with its healing bonus, this is a rather minor difference. So, with that said, you might be thinking, okay, so Determination is better. Why are all the tanks and healers stacking direct hit then? And the answer to that is simply put that stats don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, the more Determination you have, the more damage your direct hits will do, simply because the base damage is greater. Similarly, the more direct hit you have, the more valuable Determination becomes because the boosted base damage makes things like direct hit better. What this means is that in most situations, somewhat evenly spreading your Determination and direct hit leads to slightly more damage than if you were to just dump everything into one of them. Naturally, as Determination is a tiny bit better due to its scaling, optimally, you would want to evenly split between Determination and direct hit and then give slightly more to Determination to be perfect. This then leads to the explanation as to why DPS jobs are often advised to prioritize Determination first, while tanks and healers prioritize direct hit. Let's start with DPS jobs. As DPS gear usually has 2 amongst crit, direct hit, Determination and the appropriate speed for the job, this should mean, on average, that any gear piece is equally likely to have direct hit or Determination. So an average gear set should have an equal amount of Determination and direct hit, if all stats on gear were randomly generated anyway. This means that if you were to blindly choose what stat to focus on with your materia between Determination and direct hit, the assumption that these stats should be equal on average would mean you should focus on Determination. In reality, what you should focus on is whichever one is lower, with the exception that you want, well, around 2% points more Determination. This is also why most stat priorities will write critical hit greater than Determination greater than or equal to direct hit, because it depends on your actual gear situation whether Determination is actually greater. For tanks and healers then, it is a lot simpler. Tank gear usually has 2 amongst crit, tenacity, determination and skill speed, while healer gear usually has 2 amongst crit, piety, determination and spell speed. As direct hit is never on tank or healer gear, you can blindly assume that they will never have more direct hit than determination, which means that if you were to choose to melt for either determination or direct hit, then direct hit will always be the better choice. Again, remember that Determination only increases healing from spells, meaning only paladins can use it for healing amongst the tanks. And the less healing you perform with spells as a healer, the less relevant this property of Determination becomes as well. Now, this sort of explains the relationship between Determination and direct hit. But to explain the reason why they are the middle of the pack of stats, we need to talk about the other stats. Let's start with the stats that are considered weaker than Determination and Direct Hit. First off, for tanks, you need precisely 40% more tenacity to gain the same damage bonus from tenacity as you would from determination. So essentially, in any situation where we are looking at raw damage output, usually we are when optimizing, tenacity is simply worse. For a more in-depth look at tenacity, I recommend checking my video specifically about tenacity. While on the subject of role-specific stats, Piety is naturally also strictly worse than Determination for damage output since, well, Piety doesn't do anything other than grant extra MP to healers. I also have a video going more in depth with Piety. Skill speed and spell speed are more complicated to explain, and on top of this, sometimes they are better depending on the job. In short, the speed stats increase damage over time, auto-attack damage, and also reduces your GCD, meaning you can fit specifically more GCDs in a fight. For a select few jobs, it can also allow them to fit extra uses of specific actions. The GCD reduction is also linear, meaning that the more speed you have, the more valuable the next increment is. However, as speed increases the percentage of GCDs per minute only slightly faster than determination increases all damage done, speed is often considered worse unless it offers something specifically valuable to a job, like aligning your GCD in a very specific way with raid buffs like for Monk and Samurai. Or the majority of the job's damage comes from GCDs. Reducing your GCD from 2.5 to 2.4 costs about as much stat points as it costs to get 4% determination, and reducing your GCD to 2.4 is equivalent to around 4.17% more GCDs per minute. For the deeper dive on the speed stats, I of course also have a separate video on that. But to summarize on those stats, Tenacity and Piety are objectively always worse for damage output, and the speed stats are awkward for most jobs and valuable for a select few. For those that speed is valuable for, it is often the most valuable stat they have access to up to a certain point, with certain jobs wanting even more speed beyond that. Now, that only leaves critical hit and why it is considered better than determination and direct hit. At base value, all jobs have a 5% chance to do 40% more damage with a critical hit. Both the chance and power is boosted by 0.1% for every 9.5 points of critical hit. This means that the exact value of critical hit increases the more you have of it. However, critical hit starts incredibly weak, requiring about 29 points to gain plus 0.1% damage output, relatively speaking. When you have 1400, this is closer to 19 points, and by 2000, crit completely overtakes determination. This is further emphasized by the fact that as crit also boosts critical damage, it makes you scale better with buffs that boost your critical hit chance in any way, in contrast to direct hit, which, sort of, is made worse by the mere existence of raid buffs that boost direct hit chance. This overwhelming effect of critical hit happens because of relative power gains. If you already have 5% determination, then to increase your DPS by 1% by increasing determination alone, you would need to go from 5% determination to 6.05% determination, rather than just 6%. The same problem applies to direct hit, making the stats proportionally less valuable the more you have of them, part of the reason why you want to get equal amounts of them also. Critical hit does not have this problem, as it double dips whenever you increase it, as both the chance and the payoff is boosted, meaning that once critical hit catches up to determination or direct hit, it stays ahead. This is simply a property unique to critical hit, and it just so happens to both make critical hit better than all other stats for most jobs, while also only being better if you fully commit to it, which is probably the core reason why critical hit is considered the best in this way. So to summarize, determination and direct hit are excellent stats, and they are both great in small, medium and large amounts. The reason they're better than a lot of other stats is simply because the other stats either aren't fully committed to dealing more damage, making determination and direct hit better at that particular aspect, which is often preferred in Final Fantasy XIV, or the other stats simply grant their damage bonus in a very difficult to quantify way, like speed. The only reason why critical hit is the king of damage boosting stats is that if you do commit to stacking it, it becomes better than both determination and direct hit. Meaning that, even if critical hit scaled a bit worse so that it capped out at being even with determination and direct hit, the simple fact that critical hit requires you to commit to it fully to become good means that it would still be best to prioritize critical hit, so that you have access to the 3 best damage boosting stats instead of just 2 of them. That is to say, There's nothing wrong with Determination and Direct Hit as stats, aside from them maybe being a bit boring. But the only way for them to get better, or even be considered the best, is if Critical Hit loses its edge a bit. I hope you found this discussion interesting, but for now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can make sure to let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, Determination never increased healing done by anything other than spells, and the tooltip itself never stated otherwise. In contrast, Tenacity never increased healing received, but always increased all healing done by the player. However, Tenacity's tooltip is a bit confusing in its wording. Direct Hit was added as a stat to replace hit chance when that was removed from the game. Better to get a better hit sometimes, rather than missing sometimes.